Thank you. Well, Digital Skills Forum on the future of work. That's a tough one, isn't it? The famous Danish parliamentarian said, it is difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. Because nobody really knows what the future of work is going to look like, especially these days when it's all been upended by COVID anyway. But it's pretty certain that it's going to involve some kind of interaction with a lot of data-rich, massively connected, pervasively digital stuff. So what has that got to say to education? What should education do to prepare children for a world like that? Well, it's not the business of education to prepare kind of oven-ready employees. Instead, we're trying to equip students with the skills and the knowledge that they need to survive and thrive through successive waves of technology. But things are moving so fast, it can be hard to know exactly what those skills and knowledge are. Just how should education evolve from where it is at the moment? What educational pathways, both academic and vocational, do we need? And also, more particularly, how should employers engage with education in a constructive and thoughtful way, rather than merely consume its products, if I may put it like that? So we've got three speakers who I will introduce as we get to them, who will each give a sort of 7-minute introduction to their take on these kind of questions. We'll have a little bit of question and answer thereafter, and then we'll do 3 lots of 10 minutes, and then questions from the audience. So I'm hoping that the audience, who we cannot see, but I know you are hanging on every word, and I hope that you will, as we go, type questions into the chat. Don't use the Q&A, just use the chat. That way everybody can see everybody's questions, and we'll collect them up at the end and address them then. Please don't disappoint us by just sitting there like bread puddings and eating your biscuits. Okay, so let's start with Abigail Gilbert, who is works at the Institute for the Future of Work. She researches the experience and implication of data-driven technologies in the workplace, and knows quite a bit about the risk to equality of machine learning systems in HR functions. She's particularly interested in the way technology can impact society's distribution of power and resources, and the need to create systems that build a fairer future for better work. So, Abigail, over to you. Oops, but you're muted.
Unmute, there we go. Hello.
There you go, thank you.
Thank you for that kind introduction. So yeah, as Simon said, I'm here today from the Institute for the Future of Work, and our organisation was founded with a mission to make work better and fairer through technological change. And this is something that we hope that all technologists can also join in the project of, and that's what I hope to I suppose talk to you about today in terms of creating the technologists, coders and programmers of tomorrow. So I suppose the first question that I want to hold in your mind through the course of the next 7 minutes is, does automation automatically make work better? Obviously, we rely on technology to improve productivity, and this is something which changes labour markets that we should really think about and sort of prioritise. But is this guaranteed that it will improve jobs? Well, as an organisation, we look at the kind of introduction of machine learning systems, algorithmic decision-making tools across various parts of the sort of work life cycle. So in hiring, in recruitment, and in workforce management, as well as other kind of spaces. And what we know is that through the pandemic, the use of these systems in work has increased as kind of the incentive structures for automation have changed. So obviously, the necessity of kind of separating human beings from each other has increased through the pandemic, trying to reduce the number of people that are in office spaces for those that still had to travel to work. And the acceptability of doing things in a digital way has been more accepted because of, I suppose, the kind of hesitation to have human contact. So in a recent project that we did, we were sort of considering very specifically the introduction of algorithmic management tools, which are basically platforms in the way that we sort of understand some of the kind of gig economy workers to work. Those platforms are being introduced into established businesses. And in our report on this, An Amazonian Era, we kind of talk about that a little bit. So this research is based on a review of connected worker platforms, which are a new kind of general purpose technology that's trying to coordinate the work of workers who go to workplaces. So unlike a lot of us that work at home and rely on packages like Microsoft to work in the kind of home environment and as a desk-based worker, for workers that move around, there's been this kind of explosion in products which help to convene and coordinate and digitally mediate the work that they do. So this research looked at this across a range of sectors with a national survey, with Usdaw Union, 3 deep dive case studies, some focus groups, and a review of the connected worker marketplace of products with interviews with developers and their investors. And what we learned was that essentially there's a common process of work transformation when these systems are introduced. And it has these kind of 3 stages that we've articulated as the human data cycle. And essentially this is this first stage of representation sees what is recognized as work narrowed to be defined as what can be seen by data gathering technologies and recognized within the system. Following on from that, the kind of standards of work, and so this might be, say, for desk-based workers, the number of emails, or it might be for a shop-based worker, the number of items that are scanned across a till, which can be used to evaluate performance. In the second stage of this process of algorithmic management and data-driven management, standards are set. So this might be the kind of, this leads to an intensification of work, or it can do. So the greater scheduling of tasks, which allows for higher levels of output and productivity. And finally, this process is stabilized by intervention. So essentially, this could be a social process like nudges. So a worker getting nudges through their phone to say that they need to complete the next task, or it can be material through contract changes. So we also found that a lot of the workforce were having their ability to secure higher hours of contract linked to their ability to secure these kinds of levels of work output as measured by the sort of data-driven system. So if you were to have time to have a look at the report, you'd find a number of case studies that could help to articulate what this looks like in practice. But generally what we sort of discovered and learned from this was that there are a number of impacts of this kind of process on good work. So both in terms of fair terms and conditions and access to good work. So the design and deployment of these tools has been kind of changing the requirement for workers to use some of their tacit skill, but also that it's not always completely transparent to them about how these systems are used to evaluate their performance. So transparency is a key issue there. There have also been impacts on dignity and autonomy of workers who've felt increasingly surveilled, and actually the developers of this technology that we were talking to recognize that this is the way that businesses are deploying it isn't always improving the agency of those who are meant to benefit from the tools, which is what they want them to do. You know, the developers of these systems want them to empower people that are in work, but that's not always how it plays out in practice. And that this has a sort of knock-on effect on health and well-being. And so in the report, we use our Good Work Charter to provide a framework to think about what some of the impacts can be when technology isn't designed to kind of deployed in a way that promotes the well-being of workers. Now, the reason that this matters for technology educators is because amongst some of the developers that we spoke with, they sort of noted that often the focus was on perfecting systems rather than understanding the humans that were at the center of them. And this lack of recognition of the people that are using these systems can kind of contribute to this outcome in the end. So I suppose designing technology for good work is something that we need to think about from the outset and putting humans at the center of that. So to conclude, I suppose what we need is a movement for human-centered automation in products that are built for the workplace. And for those of you who are deploying technology products, we advise that our Good Work Charter could be used to kind of consider how technology might shape the experience of work in different ways. When deploying data-driven systems, it might be worth considering impact assessments with the workforce, which we'll be able to support you with. And we'll hope to continue this conversation. Follow us for more at the Future of Work Institute.
Great, thank you, Abby. I think one thing that jumped out at me from what you were saying is in this stuff about surveillance and measurement is that we tend to value what we can measure. Mm-hmm. And what you were describing is more ways in which we can measure things. Mm-hmm. There's a certain danger that we'll put more trust in in those measurements, that we'll come to only value the things you can measure. So I guess my question is, how do we, if we can't measure the things that we really value, how do we make sure that we're not placing too much trust in the measurements that we are making? I guess that underlies some of the slides that you were describing.
Yeah, I think that's a really incisive point. And actually, what we found through the survey was that this process of narrowing what's defined as valuable within work also mm-hmm. leads workers to feel devalued, as they can't do the very human things of talking to each other, and having, I suppose, the interactions that we think are a core part of what work is, as much as getting things done. So in terms of the answer to that question, what we would suggest is that there needs to be greater deliberation within the workplace and conversations about what can contribute to productivity and whether or not that needs to be measured. And that's something that we're sort of focusing on in the future.
Or perhaps even not that it doesn't need to be measured. It's just that the things that we really value are somehow really hard to measure. But that doesn't mean they're not valuable. In fact, they're the very things that we might value the most, and sort of making that very explicit in the conversation, the sort of dialogue that you're describing between an employer and their colleagues might be quite helpful.
Yeah, thank you. We'll have a think about that.
Yeah. So leave us with one thing, Abby. If we want to remember one thing from what that we should take away from your all the thinking you've been doing about the future of work, what would it be?
I suppose it would be that technology has huge potential to make all of our lives richer if we design and deploy it in the right fashion. But this outcome is not inevitable for work, and we need to be conscious of designing work to improve its lived experience by using technology to serve that ends. And that's it from me.
Yeah, I guess you'd probably say that the Institute for Work is partly about trying to give employers and indeed everybody guidance about how to thoughtfully apply technology in a way that genuinely enhances the workplace. Would that be right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Super. Okay. Thank you, Abby. Let's move on to Chris Hildridge, who is at the pointy end of all this. Chris is an experienced physics teacher. He's also responsible for STEM strategy across an entire multi-academy trust called the Challenge Academy Trust. And he is also the leader of the National Centre for Computing Education, the thing that I have the honour to chair, Computing Hub for Merseyside and Warrington. That is the local beacon for computing education in Merseyside and Warrington. He's also a specialist leader of education appointed by the DFE, and has other leadership roles in STEM education. He's also, I don't know whether you're going to tell us anything about this, the director of UK's only Fab Lab in a school setting, which sounds fabulous, but maybe it's to do with fabrication. So Chris, thank you for coming. Please do share with us what you have.
Thank you very much. I'll just put my screen on. Hopefully this comes through. So I'll come through okay?
Yep,
okay.
That's it. Yep.
Perfect. So my name's Chris Hillage. I'm the Director of STEM for the Challenge Academy Trust. And, we started to think about the future of work maybe 6 years ago across our trust. Education has changed in the last 10 to 12 years. The curriculum has become much narrower. There's been a focus on a knowledge-rich curriculum, and there's some merits to that certainly, but we've seen that the creative and digital aspects of school have often been squeezed out of the side. And our trust is based in Warrington, which sits kind of equidistant more or less between Manchester and Liverpool, where the digital and creative economies are absolutely huge. So we didn't feel that we'd be doing our students a service if we didn't effectively prepare them to move into those industries should they want to. So in terms of other aspects that we needed to consider, the particular school that I work on sits in an area of considerable socioeconomic deprivation. And we know also that there are a lot of barriers that prevent these children from moving into high value STEM education and careers, because they don't necessarily have the network of support around them that you or I might be able to offer to our children or relatives. So we knew we needed, as a trust and as a school, to put those steps in place. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, some of the ways in which we did that. And we also recognised from the research that there's a particular age group in which we could have the most impact. And, that fitted in with the students that we teach, even though they go from kind of 4 to 19. Sat there in the middle is Key Stage 3, where we can have a lot of impact. This was kind of the mantra for everything that we did. We recognised that we needed to put aspirational role models in front of our children, and not just in front of them in terms of a lecture theatre, but allow them to engage with and interact with in a meaningful way, to break down some of those barriers for our students and to exemplify the routes that they might take into future careers that either exist now or will exist in 20, 30 years that we probably haven't even thought about. So we in terms of a strategy, as a trust, we put together the basics were kind of, that was just a given, but we wanted a curriculum. And when I talk about a curriculum, I'm not talking about kind of 9 till 3 on the school day. I'm talking about the whole package that wraps around the schools and the children, that inspired creativity, that taught real, genuine tech skills that were being used in industry. Very much about bringing industry and education together. We often found there was two sides pushing a door, but often coming at it from slightly different angles, and we felt it was our job to kind of open that door for both sides, where they both felt they could interact meaningfully, to allow students to work on real world STEM projects, real world digital creative projects, and we needed to kind of make those opportunities for our students and for industry, but also to allow our students to see the value of a STEM education so that they could make an informed choice about what they were going to do next. This is how we started, really small, and I've seen that Alan is in the meeting, and Alan was involved in this right there in the early days. But we wanted our children to be to work on projects and creative around digital skills, around stuff that got them excited. But what was more important is that we brought industry professionals in to work alongside the teachers, to work alongside the students. What we find is that, when our teachers can have meaningful conversations and talk about what's going on in industry, they can then be the best advocates for those sectors when they're going back into the classroom, interacting with hundreds of kids every week. And that's a really kind of powerful way to get messages across about what's going on in industry. We wanted parents involved. We know that we didn't want the child being involved in something really exciting, going home and talking to a parent who didn't really know what they were going on about. So we made sure that this kind of collaboration was 3 and 4 way, really. That's where the kind of energy and the impact came from. It changed the profile of the school in many ways, and what we wanted was for the school to become a community resource, and it very much did so. And this happened in other schools within the trust, and we recognise that industry also, as much as we see a barrier going for our students interacting with industry see the same. They see the same barriers. They want to meaningfully interact. There was in the news this week about shrinking labour pool, and industries are recognising that they are having to, they're going to have to compete for what is a shrinking pool of talented people, and so they've got an interest in being involved in education. And I think certainly one of the things that needs to develop is the commitment of industry back into education. But equally, from the education point of view, we need to be open-minded and we need to be flexible in terms of how that happens, but it does need to be on a meaningful basis. And as Simon mentioned, the Fab Lab in Warrington was another way in which we wanted our digitally creative students who perhaps coding wasn't their thing, but they wanted to create something tangible or something they could turn into a business. So we created the Fab Lab, but one of the kind of drivers was that we had SMEs, we had startups, we had creative people from across the Northwest working with our students, working alongside them, working alongside the teachers. And that's not an easy thing to manage in a school, but in terms of the cross-fertilization, that's where a lot of the huge kind of leaps forward came from, and it's been a success. And there's lots of in the Fab Lab. There's lots of exciting projects go on, but one of the ones that kind of exemplifies what I'm talking about is we had an engineer from Bentley who worked with hundreds of students to produce an electric vehicle. So they all started on the initial design, and all the kids had an input, hundreds of iterations. We built the prototype in the Fab Lab. The children saw it being tested. Some of the children, the older children were involved in the testing, and then it went to market. And the idea of children seeing someone have an idea, turn that into something digital, turn that into something tangible is an incredibly powerful experience. And there's a lot of children who've kind of ran with that idea, and it's kind of had an impact on where they will go in the future. And then the Fab Lab is a public-facing organisation. Times have been pretty tough in public-facing organisations because there hasn't been a public to face for the last 18 months. But one of the projects that we got involved with and that we kind of led on it in this country was, we worked with the PPE stuff like a lot of places did, but we collaborated worldwide with this digital creation of a ventilation mask, essentially. And the children now coming back into schools. Some of them are going out again with the bubbles, but we'll see how that pans out. they've seen that this collaboration across the world, the fact that this digital way of working enables them to interact with people from entirely different organizations. HE, we were recently working, because obviously India and Nepal had this next variant very recently. We were working with those, and our students see that and recognize the value of what they can do, and it's brought a whole new demographic. The kind of idea of tech for good has pulled in a whole new group of kids who kind of recognize the values now. And then this meaningful interaction, just an example of what I'm talking about would be with United Utilities. They'd seen further down the line that they had some shortages, 10 years down the line in things like software engineering or digital marketing. And they've worked with us in schools, and over a period of 4 months every year, their professionals work in schools for 2 hours a week with groups of kids on a real world project. And the most powerful part of it is kind of the conversations that take place informally between whether it's a software engineer and the teacher, software engineer and the students. Those are what's really kind of changing hearts and minds, I would say. But we also recognise, I think, that there were some students where an academic route, a higher level apprenticeship isn't the route for them, and they want to progress through an academic route. So we also work with Oxford. And the students have been working with researchers from Oxford. And the idea that children can see those steps, that pathway that I mentioned at the start, is a way that they can progress. It's really interesting, actually. Just as a side note, in February 2020, before everything kind of went off, we were working with the virologists from Oxford, and they all became extremely busy at the end of February as they had something else to focus on, which is another really good lesson for our students, to be honest. I'm not going to make my final point, because I think what hopefully come out in the questions, but I think in terms of we're not here to be, schools aren't here to be to provide workers for industry. I think we're here to do much more. And I think working together with industry and schools in a genuine partnership that's meaningful and evenly balanced is the way forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Chris. I love the description you've given of the partnership between industry and various schools in your trust. That sounds lovely. And positively inspiring, actually. Well, one quick question. I think in the beginning you mentioned disadvantaged students. So one thing that people often say about clubs and after-school activities and weekend activities is that the kids who come to them tend to be self-selected, or the children of middle-class parents like me who will sort of push them towards it, and the disadvantaged children, the one kind that don't show up. So how do you worry about that? Is that a problem in practice? How does it play out for you?
Yeah, absolutely, and that definitely was an issue for us, and I think it was a kind of constant focus on what we found was almost like a donut effect. Our immediate demographic of the school children weren't necessarily accessing some of the amazing stuff that was going on in the school, but then the leafier suburbs of the town and further afield were the children that we were seeing that were involved. So basically we used our teachers to act as kind of influencers and to bring more kids in. What we did was we found responsibility positions for some of the students that we wanted particularly to be involved, so that they, and then they kind of acted as a nucleus, and other children kind of clustered and came in. And a lot of it is it's a barrier, it's kind of psychological barrier of the children making that step and their parents making the step across the threshold of the school on a Saturday morning, for example. Once that kind of the tipping point is reached, the school is very much a community resource where parents feel a lot more comfortable, and often parents who've not had the most positive experience in school can be won over by the fact that you've got this amazing experience on their doorstep.
So it sounds like carefully targeted but quite explicitly planned encouragement to particular students is a big part of what you do.
Yeah, definitely.
So, and just to finish up, I'll ask the same question I asked to Abigail. What if we remember any one thing from what you told us about future of work, what would it be?
I suppose it's to kind of go back to that idea that education and schools aren't here to turn. We often get criticised from kind of business community for not turning out students with certain skills, but I think in what we're trying to do is we're trying to develop those creative skills, develop that kind of teamwork and communication, and the idea of a student who's got a good idea, who can be agile in how they kind of go about making that into a reality, into a business or a project, and being able to influence others through the power of their kind of ideas is where I see that's how we set up children for the future, in terms of having them a career that's valuable and successful in whatever form that works for them.
Great, thank you, Chris. We'll get, there's been a few questions in the chat, which we'll try to get to as part of the Q&A at the end. But for now, I'm going to just move on to Mavis. So Mavis Macchioria, I hope I'm pronouncing you right, I'm sure you'll tell us, is a researcher at the Ada Lovelace Institute, where I'm sure she'll tell us a bit about, which aims to ensure that the transformative power of data and AI is used in a way that actually makes a difference to society and maximizes social well-being. So Mavis, please take the floor.
Thanks, Simon. It's been really interesting just listening to Abigail and Chris, and I hope that some of what I say picks up on some of those points that they've been raising as well. So as you heard at the ADA, we are interested in making sure that digital tech and data-driven systems work for everyone. And this means for us trying to understand what that society is and why some people aren't able to participate in those. So really, I just want to take the next few minutes to kind of think about and reflect on what this might mean for different sections of society, more as a provocation. And I'll try and do a thread that will hopefully make sense, linking parents and children into really thinking about digital skills, digital technologies. So really, I'm thinking kind of firstly from inequalities perspective that already exists, and how these might impact on who gets to have digital access and who gets to build digital skills, and what that might mean in the future for people's work and well-being. And from a skills perspective, I guess one of the things that we think about is the issue of a data and digital divide. And this impacts on those who are able to participate right from the beginning. We might have assumptions about people having access to the hardware already to support their learning. And we know that not everyone has access to this. We know there was an Ofcom report that came out earlier this year that said about 20% of children didn't have access to hardware to help them in schools, or actually to do homeschooling while schools were closed. There's usually an intersecting range of reasons that see people not be unable to participate in acquiring the skills that are needed to participate. In 2018, the Royal Society of Arts produced a report that showed that there were nearly 1 million people in zero-hour contracts, and we've heard already from Abigail how some of this impacts on people who are already gainfully employed. But the precarious nature of these kinds of roles means that sometimes people actually have other sort of responsibilities that might stop them from acquiring these digital skills that are needed to progress in work. But also, if the employer is one of the ways that people can access or gain or improve their skills, if you're in a precarious role, the employer is probably not going to invest that kind of money or resource to help you to improve those skills. So the downstream effect is that if you, as a parent or a guardian, don't have the skills required, you can't then support your own children to then also develop their own skills. And here I consider the holistic impact then of the lacking of digital skills for the workforce and the impact on the person and their family. We know, for instance, that the Lloyds Bank Consumer Digital Index in 2018 produced a report saying 11.3 million, that was about 21% of people in the UK lacked the full basic digital skills. And within this, people who were registered, who had registered disabilities were 4 times more likely to be offline. People who were over 60, there was almost a third of them were offline. So this really impacts the abilities that people will have in sort of participating in digital skills. And if we consider that, in the past year, the need for digital skills has really sort of, that demand has increased. And in the same index, the report produced this year showed that 34%, so just over a third of people who were benefit claimants had really low digital engagement. And this meant that they were not able to access online banking. They had very little ability to order, online food, for instance. And actually, this means that you're more likely to find yourself in a position where you're exposed to the virus, for instance, and that then, you know, impacts on the ability to go to work and also look after your family. And all of this is really important because digital skills are not just about being online, right? But it's about being able to then use the range of technologies that accompany those digital skills. And at the ADA levels, we produced a report earlier this year showing that in a survey of about just over 2,100 British adults, 20% of them didn't have access to hardware or software to access online services. And those people who are earning less than 20,000 were also less likely to be able to participate in digital technologies. Older people, migrants, are also some of those kind of different identities that people had that, you know, and different experiences that stopped them from participating. This is really important because then you can't access contact tracing, you can't access your GP if you aren't able to go online. And so thinking about, you know, workforce and well-being and society as a whole, these are really, you know, important things to be considering. And for education, we know that, as Chris has already mentioned, people from, you know, key stage 3, the children, people from who were accessing free school meals. There were all these inequalities that we could see in the people who were then responding to some of the initiatives that were there. And this continues in university. We know there's an attainment gap between Black people, Black children, and the rest of university students. And so if people aren't able to, you know, attain the kind of grades that are needed to access sort of higher employment, this already means that the ways in which they participate in the digital economy is going to be limited. And when we think about, even if people really work hard, there's still algorithms that might actually stop them from then, you know, accessing certain kinds of gainful employment. And sort of just to kind of wrap up, I guess the downstream effect of this is that if we're not enabling children to kind of participate in STEM or gain their own digital skills, this means that the workforce that we eventually will get will continue to be quite homogeneous. We ask very similar questions about the problems in society. We might think that facial recognition or certain kind of medical technologies will work for everyone, but actually we only know that they don't work when people who are impacted by them start to ask questions. And so it's about not just the skills to get online, but being, you know, being able to critically assess what information you're facing means, what it means to be over surveilled, what it means to, you know, consent or not consent to get your data used in particular ways. So I guess all in all, just to kind of wrap up, is that there's a depth of information about what, you know, what digital skills really means and how we can enable people to access the different kinds of technologies beyond just being able to access, you know, online banking. And I guess I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mavis. Though I have to say, it all sounds a bit discouraging, doesn't it? So
I know.
you know, so that you know, there's this fairly large portion of people who don't have access to hardware, the internet, don't have the skills. I wonder whether is there any sense in which, in some ways, it's not to do with technology that, you know, that people have always been excluded in various ways, and I'm wondering whether in some ways digital technology might also be part of the solution as well as part of the problem. That, I mean, do you have examples, or do you work on ways of thinking about how could digital technology help people out of disadvantage, or be a ladder, you know, that gives them a route to a better life, right, rather than being a means of their exclusion? Is that something that you've surveyed or thought about at all?
Yeah, we're constantly thinking about it. And it's something that I guess, sort of coming from a sociological background, you always think about, you know, the negative impacts, or you kind of critique society in that way. But there are absolutely good examples of where digital technologies have helped. Some people have found that the pandemic has actually been, you know, being able to get online in the pandemic has been more useful for accessing certain services that they might not have been able to if they had to go in person. And so we're constantly thinking about, well, what exactly are we talking about when we think about it, what we mean when we think about impact. It's not necessarily just negative impact. And I'll give an example of initiatives that are, say, helping people get online. There's the Liverpool Data, I think it's called the Liverpool Data Initiative, probably not quite those words, but what they're doing is finding ways in which they can make sure that data that everyone within but then the council has access to data. So it's not just you have access to a laptop, but actually do you have the necessary data that would exactly so that you're not just excluded because you don't have access to these things. So they're definitely good initiatives around that.
All right, very quickly, in your sort of one sentence, one key takeaway for us.
Think about digital skills as part of a larger social understanding, and think about what we're trying to achieve when we think about the technology or digital skills that are required. So there's the kind of necessary societal infrastructures that are needed beyond the technology itself.
Great. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So we've had some questions in the chat. Julia, have you sort of picked one out that the panel could address first?
Hi, Simon. Yes, we have. So what we want the panel to think about is, and to talk about, is what key skills in particular for the future do they feel are going to be the most important? We can't predict what technology is going to be available, so we can't be certain about some of that. But what are the skills that young people will need to develop, both to take into the workforce, but also, as Mavis quite rightly points out, to be able to interact fully in society as we increase our dependence on digital.
I always want to say, what skills and knowledge will they need to, and then the rest of your question. who would like to tackle that? Any of you? Abigail?
I defer to Chris first.
Fine. I think I saw him open his mouth, actually, so.
I didn't realise there was an option to defer, otherwise. I think what the question that Simon asked me before was what I think is the idea to be able to, we've no idea what jobs will be around and what the workforce will look like in 20 years. But I think if you look at, for example, teaching and remote access to learning, I think we saw there that is a job that is relatively future-proof, because although we saw some students who were able to access learning, even for the most motivated and rigorous kind of students who worked hard from home, it's definitely not the same experience as being in the classroom. There's a whole lot more to schools than just the learning, all those different skills. And I think that in terms of the skills that they need moving forwards, I think that idea to think creatively to solve problems, but also to be able to influence others with their ideas and communicate those ideas well, but also to be agile around how they approach problems and solutions to problems. I think that collaborative working, now that the digital kind of way of working really enhances that possibility, and we've seen that just this meeting here, there's 40 people sat in all different corners of the country who possibly wouldn't have talked to each other if we all hadn't made the move to Zoom and other ways of remote working. So yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Great, thank you. Anything else, Julia?
Sorry, yeah, thank you, Chris. I mean, I completely agree, and I'd also add self-confidence and sort of self-belief to that list. I think, particularly in the sense of ensuring that it's a diverse and inclusive access for everybody. I think that's possibly a limiting factor that maybe some groups will find. Right, okay, yeah, we've had lots of chat in lots of comments in the chat about the curriculum versus extracurricular. And again, I feel like this might come your way, Chris, but it's kind of like, what do the panel think about sort of how we can engage that sort of, it's the 24/7 curriculum for learning for everyone. It's not, learning isn't about the 9 till 3, and it doesn't start when you're 5 and finish when you're 16 or 18. It's kind of, we're all doing it, we're doing it now. So in terms of that, it'd be interesting to hear from the panel on what they feel we should consider to ensure that we kind of harness that continual learning for everybody.
Yep. Anybody feel inspired here?
I just noticed there was one comment in the chat that mentioned something about, you know, a young athlete doesn't learn to be an athlete in school PE lessons. They learn to be an athlete in the things that they do that fit around school, and you know, the extracurricular stuff that they do. And I think the same is true with, you know, a child's digital development. And you know, we can all use a phone, but can we interact meaningfully in other ways? And I think that one of the things that this move to digital has changed is, you know, there was a lot of stuff around flipped learning before we made the pandemic, but it wasn't particularly effective or widespread. But I think that's changed it in many ways. The fact that, you know, teachers can be, they can offer a much wider range of stimulus material that is almost like what we call differentiation within schools for those children who do have a particular focus or interest. It's a lot easier to do that now, I would say.
Just a question here that builds on that, I think, from Alan, which is about whether the panel think that digital skills should be assessed in some way. Should we have a qualification?
And if so, how? Yes. You mean, I guess he means as part of a school's sort of offer.
I suppose just to,
yes, Abigail.
Yeah, sorry. I suppose just to come into that one, and I suppose link it to the last point, and I suppose it also touches on what Mavis has been saying about thinking about this beyond just the classroom, which probably relates more to our work. I have to give an apology for the fact we haven't looked at kind of skills demands as they need to happen in education. But there is, I suppose, a call for employers to think more seriously about the relationship between the introduction of technologies and how to ensure that the workforce have the capabilities and skills to use those kinds of resources. So hopefully what we can think about, as I suppose Mavis was thinking about, kind of the whole life cycle from beginning to end of ensuring that people are equipped and don't end up becoming excluded from the workforce. And the research that we did, we found that often the introduction of these systems without supplementary kind of education for workers can lead to an age bias discrimination in the workforce, which is obviously sad for people to be excluded on the basis of their digital skills. So yeah, I think we need to have a social dialogue about the fact that there needs to be an ongoing access to ongoing education of digital skills in relation to work, and as Mavis is sensibly pointing out, beyond it.
Mavis, do you want to add anything? Because we're sort of coming towards the end. So if you've got anything to add, whether or not it's to do with that last question, just any intervention you'd like to make.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think the place in which these digital skills are applied is also really useful, right? So I think in various ways, all of us have spoken about the role of kind of that relational aspect of society. And we should also find ways, I think, of enhancing skills within community centers so that people are continuing to have these, whether they're termed soft skills, but these absolutely crucial skills of relationality, being able to continue to understand their, kind of their place in relation to everyone else, how they interact as they also learn digital skills. Because I think then the questions that we ask and the ways in which we view society and our responsibilities to each other will kind of all grow together as opposed to being seen as siloed.
Great, thank you. I'm a bit conscious that it's 5:15, so we should wrap up. One thing that's come over quite strongly to me is that there's this kind of three-way triangle. It's quite complicated making these parts move together. There's the talk curriculum, there's a sort of extracurricular and weekend and evening activities, and then there's sort of employers and in the world of work. And if these three can sort of work together, and I think Chris has given us the most vivid pictures of those kind of things working together, that can be really productive. But doing any one of them well, right, as Abigail was talking about, the world of work, that piece alone is complicated, schools alone are complicated. Making those three work together well is quite hard, and I think will require some sustained attention. But the results can be very exciting. So for me, that's my big takeaway. So I'd like to thank Abigail and Mavis and Chris very much for giving us your time, and Julia for managing the chat. I hope that those of you who are sitting on the call invisible to us have found it somewhat stimulating and interesting, and I wish you a very good afternoon.
Thanks, Simon. And just to let everyone know that the recordings will be available on the Teach Computing website next week. And do join us at the next Digital Skills Forum on Thursday, September the 9th at 4:30, where we'll be talking about digital skills and ethics. And then the following one will be Friday the 10th of October on digital skills and sustainability. So hope to see you then. If we don't see you before, have a lovely summer. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Simon.